Hi, I'm Dawn Marie Solis with INIS 2022 Neurodiversity Conferences, and I am here with Jessica Eccles, Dr. Jessica Eccles, and she is a researcher on the connection between brain and body. We're going to be talking today about one of her focuses of hypermobility, something that I am keenly interested in because it's a recent understanding of my own experience. And something that I feel like, at least here in the United States, is really almost not known.
Right.
Our medical communities, our therapeutic communities often don't really understand it, haven't heard about it, and certainly don't get the wider perspective or the neurodivergence connection. And so thank you for being willing to talk to everybody here. I really appreciate that.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
What drew you to this work?
Well, it's an interesting question, and to be honest, it was quite pragmatic, really. I wanted a combined clinical research career in psychiatry and neuroscience. So when I arrived at Brighton and Sussex Medical School way back in 2009, my supervisor at the time, Hugo Critchley, he suggested a project on hypermobility, and he said, "Oh, have you heard of it?" And I said, "Well, actually, I think I am hypermobile myself." So when I was a medical student in Oxford a few years before, a consultant had said to me, "I think you're hypermobile. The way you're standing, you have these sway back knees. Come and see me after ward round." And that piqued my interest in hypermobility at medical school. But at the time, I just thought of it as in my own personal experience, a source of orthopedic issues and pain. And so I was really quite intrigued when Hugo suggested that we do some neuroscience related to hypermobility. And his motivation had been really that he'd been working in London at a group that was he had formed a collaboration with an autonomic neuroscience centre, and they had been trying to do the first brain imaging study of a condition called postural tachycardia syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of it, and we can talk about it later down the line. But they found that several of the people with postural tachycardia syndrome were in fact hypermobile. So at that point, the Imaging Sciences Centre in Brighton and Sussex Medical School, where I work, had only been in existence for a couple of years. So it was a relatively manageable project to take all of the healthy, now I have to say that in inverted commas, so these were people who were taking part as what we used to call controls and now call comparison participants in other studies, and establish whether they were hypermobile or not. And we pooled their brains in a brain imaging program called SPM, for those of you who are interested in brain imaging. And we did an analysis, a voxel by voxel wise analysis across the brain, to look to see if there were any differences in brain structure, not function, between the hypermobile and the non-hypermobile group. And what we found was in both sides of the brain, the hypermobile people had different sized amygdala. Now, this was interesting because there'd been a story going around in the research world since the late 80s, early 90s, mainly directed by researchers in Spain, that had said that hypermobility was associated with panic disorder and anxiety. So it was a really pleasing finding to find that a part of the brain that's involved in emotion and fear processes was actually different in hypermobile people compared to non-hypermobile people. And this also sparked off several other connections in terms of thinking about the brain. So we found that the greater the number of hypermobile joints, the smaller the part of the brain involved in the sense of where you are in space, proprioception was. And this was interesting because at that point there were a few studies, just a few, that linked hypermobility to dyspraxia, particularly in children. And of course, dyspraxia is just one of many neurodivergences. I mean, at the time we were thinking of them as neurodevelopmental disorders, but this was interesting. So thinking, oh, hypermobility is linked with dyspraxia. And of course, dyspraxia is really common in autism, ADHD, dyslexia. It's not only a thing in and of itself, but it spans a variety of conditions and issues. So that was intriguing. And then there was some other brain imaging findings that were similar to ones that had previously been reported in autism. So this got us thinking, and this was back in 2010 probably. What are the further brain-body connections between this difference in how the body is built and in differences in brain, such as in the neurodevelopmental conditions? So that's a very long-winded story to explain how scientifically we got interested in this, but it sparked off in loads of different directions. So the relationship between hypermobility and anxiety, the relationship and trying to work out why that might be, with the hypothesis that it's to do with differences in autonomic control and autonomic regulation. So that's the involuntary nervous system. We know that, I remember reading at the time that various stimming behaviors may well be trying to regulate a slightly dysregulated autonomic nervous system. So that sort of tied in. And then we were thinking about pain, fatigue, fibromyalgia. And so we pursued a line of research into fibromyalgia, hypermobility, and autonomic issues. And it just seemed that the more you started looking into this connection between hypermobility, pain, fatigue, anxiety, neurodivergent conditions, it all seemed to spark off further connections and almost not quite take over everything, but it seemed to be a common theme for so many things that we were interested in.
Yes, so my inner science nerd is so happy right now.
I'm glad. So is mine.
I was losing. So I much of the time have to consciously regulate my face because the more I'm thinking or the more I'm feeling, the less shows on my face. It's sort of an inverse response where others will show everything on their face. The more intense I am about anything, the less happens on my face. So I have to remember your face, right? Because evidently whatever happens when I'm really intense is scary.
Poker face. It's good for working in mental health.
Yeah. But so many thoughts. I don't even know what to ask you next. I have so many things I want to ask you. Okay. So part of what I'm thinking, because hypermobility seems to touch on all of these other things.
Yes.
And hypermobility seems to not be known or understood or even acknowledged by a certain percentage of the medical community. My personal experience is that almost nobody knows about it, but that's just, that's my personal experience. So I'm not trying to minimize or demonize or anything the medical community. But this does seem to not be known.
Oh, and well. that is an experience that many people who contact me say that they have spent years looking for answers, and I think it seems to take most people about 10 years and multiple doctors' visits before they get a diagnosis that seems to be helpful.
Yes, and I think, and I can only speak from my own personal experience and sort of tangentially from what my clients tell me, what my social media world tells me. Women, especially when they come to their primary cares or they come to their psychiatrist or whatever, and they say, I think there's this thing, I've been doing research. The eye roll, stay off the internet, right? This immediate reaction to patients doing their own research and knowing themselves. I just hung up before you and I started talking with Lisa Quat, and she was telling me about a piece of the research that you all are doing where our interoception, though we're not, if I'm getting this right, and please correct me, though we're not always able to accurately articulate what we are feeling, we tend to be very connected to our insides. We feel our insides
so much.
It can be distracting. It can be tiring. It can be
confusing.
It can also be incredibly helpful if we can get anybody to listen to it. Just a minute. I can tell you everything that happens. Please think with me. And I think that's one of the things that we feel extra minimized on as a community, the neurodivergent community, is that we actually do know some stuff. And we may not have the right terminology. We may get a little confused. We might become situationally mute, right? All of those things. But we still know some stuff. And if people would validate our knowledge, we could work together. I'm not sure exactly what question I'm asking you in there. I'm hoping you can suss one out and just speak back to me.
Well, no, so I think what you're saying or articulating is that in the neurodivergent community, people often have a lot of physical sensations and maybe even physical problems that are not well understood. And if they go and talk to doctors or seek out help, this sometimes gets overshadowed or dismissed. And actually, the program of work that we are working towards suggests that in many ways, these things are actually connected, and that neurodivergence might not just be a difference for some people in the brain, but also a difference in how the body is built in terms of cardiovascular reactivity, gut movement. I mean, that's one thing I didn't touch upon when I talked about pain, fatigue, anxiety, and all of that. Was the other thing that really crops up a lot is gastrointestinal issues. And those have been associated with neurodivergence for a long time. And we know from the work that Seb and Mary have been doing that neurodivergent individuals really struggle. You know, there's so many barriers to accessing the right healthcare. So in my mind, it seems, and maybe this is too simplistic, but if we demonstrate, as we have, that some of these physical symptoms seem to be connected to neurodivergence, specifically through hypermobility, then looking for hypermobility in a neurodivergent person is so important because it might open up management options. Dare I even say treatment options in terms of physical symptoms. So if you find, and lots of people say, oh, I just thought this happened to everyone, or no one's taken that seriously, that you get very dizzy when you stand up, or you have like dizziness and palpitations, same thing, after a big meal or after a hot bath or shower. This could all be signs of autonomic dysregulation, and which may well be related to hypermobility. And if you spot that, well, then there are things that you can do to try and help. Not just drugs, but lifestyle changes, but drinking more water, taking on more salt, wearing compression garments. And there are so many ways in which identifying a possible treatment option would be so beneficial for everyone, neurodivergent or not. And it seems that piece is often missing in terms of thinking about things, brain and body things together. The other thing that's cropping up, very hard to do research in, is about mast cell activation and unusual allergies and things like that, which seem really, really common. But the management of such phenomenon, if it is mast cell activation, is actually relatively straightforward. And people's lives can be immeasurably improved, not only by understanding why their body is behaving in a particular way, but by options to help with that. So I don't know if I've actually answered your question, but
yes. Well, I didn't ask one, so you answered beautifully. And you get to the point that that I end up asking pretty much anyone who I'm talking to that's doing research or involved in the medical world as it relates to the neurodivergent community. How do we help what you're saying get out there into the world? Because there are people literally desperate. The trauma they are enduring by going to doctor after, just going to the doctor for some of us is over. Like, you can't do anything else in the day, right? If I'm going to the doctor today, that is all I am doing, because that's how much mental energy and effort and strength it takes. So the idea that I might have to go to many before I find somebody who will listen to me and take me seriously and respond to me appropriately, you know, I want to like take what you just said and bring it to every physician on the planet and say, please listen to Dr. Eccles. It's like, 3 minutes. Just please listen to this 3 minutes and let it revolutionize your practice. How do we do that?
The type of events that you're holding, this sort of conferencing, by open access scientific journals, by promoting work. The paper that I'm talking about that we published this year, that specifically linked neurodivergence to physical health problems, that was the autonomic dysfunction and pain through hypermobility, has been viewed on the internet something like 30,000 times since it was published 4 or 5 months ago, which is wonderful. And it means that I hope that the message is getting out there. So it's but open access publishing is a privilege of people like me who work in institutions and whose research projects have been funded. And that's only one way of getting the message across. Obviously, there are I'm sure you know that there are lots of other. I think we can raise awareness of this brain-body interaction, and I think it's just going to take time for everyone to catch up. And some of the things that people say to me is, "Oh, you've really summarized my life in a 3-minute video. Why didn't anyone know this before?" But to actually, the patient communities and the neurodivergent community have been talking about this for a long time, but the science is lagging, if you see what I mean. We're behind the curve almost, compared to what patients and neurodivergent people know about themselves. But I think there is a wave building, and hopefully soon this level of awareness will be heightened. But it needs to come at so many levels. It needs to come obviously for researchers to be interested in exploring this topic, because to be honest, there aren't a huge number of researchers in this space in the world. Doctors in general, it needs to get into medical school curriculums, but also into continuing professional development events, policymakers, schools. Lisa and I, we work closely with a local charity, and the chair of that charity's work with Elastanos UK to produce a toolkit for schools to try and recognise children who are hypermobile, so that we can get in there early with the appropriate adjustments and accommodations. But you can see that the awareness is on so many levels for so many people, and we're actually talking about something that's quite tangible in terms of hypermobility. Not all hypermobility is obvious, but like the doctor who saw me traipsing around an orthopedic ward at medical school, sometimes it's glaringly obvious if you're looking for it. So we talk about invisible illnesses, but hypermobility is an invisible illness, but it isn't an invisible illness. If you're looking for it, you can see the soft skin, you can see the posture, you can see the joint features. But I'm not saying sometimes it is very subtle, but sometimes it's really not, and it's just being missed.
Yeah, I think parents, I hope parents watch this, because our kids will come to us with certain pains and things like that, and we tell the pediatricians, and the pediatricians say that's just growing pains.
Exactly, which is a major dismissal in some cases. Growing pains are very real. And I mean, there are, Jane and I from the charity in SEDS Connective, we were talking about this. We're going to give a workshop at an education conference in Amsterdam in October, is how to spot the signs of hypermobility in a child. And there are things like sitting in the W position, which is sort of, I'm not sure if you can imagine it, but it's a bit like having your legs crossed but going outwards instead of inwards. Things like I'm doing now, where you sit with your legs wrapped round each other. So not just crossed, but double crossed. Being born, and this is something that happened to me in terms of hypermobility, with clicky hips, or a hip that is not quite in socket or out of socket, highly associated with hypermobility. And then if you throw in some of the neurodivergent things as well, so difficulties tying shoelaces or ball catching issues, maybe have really good fine motor stuff, but the gross motor stuff is not there necessarily. All of these things should make you think, oh, is this child hypermobile? Are they really tired? Do they seem to get dizzy? Do they have gut problems?
Yes, and to your earlier point, oh, you've just described my life in 3 minutes. Yeah, you have. My hip has popped in and out my entire life. Gut problems, all of the things. But it took me until I was 53 to even come across the idea of hypermobility, let alone understand any of it, potentially bring it to my physicians. Right now I'm seeing a number of people, because back in March I got technically hit by my own car. Somebody pulled into a parking space on the other side of my car, didn't stop, and hit me, right? Hit my car, hit me. And one of my clients started talking about hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos and telling me their experience. And I went, well, that's interesting. So of course I deep dived into all of that. And I brought to my physician, I think I'm hypermobile. And I think why the concussion happened and why I'm struggling so many months afterwards is because of this hypermobility. My muscles are working too hard to hold everything together. And when I got hit, so I got hit, I landed, and I bounced, right? And all of my muscles tried to hold everything together in such an intense way that my body's not recovering properly. And all I got in response was disbelief and disregard. And I've had to beg for every bit of help. And I see this out in the social media communities, this experience over and over and over again. I think I've found my answer, but no one will listen to me.
No.
Do you have any advice for all of us folks who are trying to explain, I would like to look into this, please help me look into this, and not simply get sent to the psychiatrist for anxiety medication, but get taken seriously?
I think you know, as you found out, that it's easy to be dismissed, and that knowledge always is power, but can sometimes backfire. And when you say, oh, I've done my research, and the doctors go, oh, there's a really good book by a British woman called Claire Smith. It's got a very long title, like Understanding Hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome and Hypermobility Spectrum Disorder.
That is a long title. I'm going to try to find this book and link to it.
Yes, and I think, and you read this book, and so many areas of physical health are covered with actually some really useful strategies. And you can take the book to the doctor and say, look, here is this. The other thing is the Ehlers-Danlos Society in the UK. We call our family healthcare practitioners GPs. They have produced a toolkit for general practitioners, which is available on the internet. I can link you to it. So this is designed for medical professionals. Apparently, there's one in Dutch in the Netherlands as well, but there's the UK version. Is available, and you can say, please have a look at this resource for doctors about how to think about and manage hypermobility and associated problems in primary care. And when I say associated problems, I mean autonomic dysfunction, mast cell activation. Those are the two main ones that this toolkit is focused on. But this is a resource to point your GP in the direction, your doctor. It's not designed for a geneticist or a rheumatologist or a neurologist. It's designed for a generalist, and also designed to try and keep you out of the hands of specialists, because obviously they're waiting. Well, in the UK, it's a different kettle of fish, but instead of accruing all of these different consults, having one point of contact to try and cover most bases. I mean, we may be slightly at cross purposes. The different healthcare systems in the world are all different, but this is a really good resource, and obviously patients can read it as well.
That's brilliant. I think here in the United States, and obviously everybody has their own experience, but I do think there is a tendency to almost immediately send somebody away to a specialist. And again, one of the things that I got really excited about when you were first talking was being able to understand the interconnectivity. Right? If somebody's hypermobile, there's interconnection with all of these other bodily systems.
Yes.
Including the brain, or maybe beginning in the brain, right? So in the US, where we tend to break the body down into bits and pieces and specialize every bit and piece, if you
can imagine how you'd end up seeing 5-6 different people.
Yes, and I can't keep track of who's who.
No.
And when I go to try to look at my care team and try to remember and try to understand with dyslexia and some of my visual intake processing challenges and I just get really overwhelmed and I quit, right? And so I want to go to my GP, or here we can, PCP. I want to go to my primary care, my general practitioner, and say, here's the stuff. Please think with me, not for me.
Yes. No.
And for me, that feels like a personal passion of mine when I talk to all of you researchers and medical folks and stuff like that, is I'm sort of enlisting you in my own personal crusade, right? To encourage the medical field to think with their patients, trust what their patients are telling them as valid and informative. So the patient is part of their own care team.
Yes, of course.
But at least here in the United States, that seems to be a rare physician when they take into serious consideration anything more than this hurts and it hurts this much. If we want to give them any more information than that, we get shushed in some kind of way. We get quieted and invalidated in some kind of way. We'll leave that thinking to the experts. How am I not one of the experts? It's my body.
No, so it's really important.
I love what both you and Lisa have said about the interoception possibilities for an autistic person. We might actually know a thing, but if we're constantly being looked at as intellectually deficient.
So many myths to bust.
Yeah. So what is you mentioned a paper that's published.
Mm-hmm.
What are you working on now that people can keep an eye out for?
So we have the work that Lisa and I have been doing, led by Lisa, that I think she talked to you about. We have a lot of work just coming out soon about biological mechanisms of pain and fatigue in fibromyalgia and ME/CFS. We've published some of that, the stuff related to hypermobility, but there's more coming, and some of that is in abstract form about how, if we think about, so we put people on a tilt table as an autonomic challenge. We also gave people a typhoid vaccination as an inflammatory challenge. This was before COVID. And we did brain scans before and after the inflammatory challenge. We found that your tilt-induced pain was in fact explained by the number of hypermobile features that you had. So there's an interaction between hypermobility and tilt-induced pain. We also found your tilt-induced fatigue was related to your baseline levels of inflammation that would normally consider to be normal, but that the higher that they were, the more the tilt-induced fatigue. So that work is coming out. We also, Lisa and I, have a paper that's under review at the moment that we pre-printed a while back that demonstrates that if you're hypermobile at 14, more likely to have anxiety and depression symptoms at 18, and that some of this, the depression, is in fact explained by or related to autonomic dysfunction at 14, so that there's this brain-body link already there in teenagers. And so that work will hopefully be coming out in the next few months and is already available as a preprint.
That's so exciting.
And that's in 6,000 young people, a whole birth cohort.
Wow. So one of the things that I talk about and advocate for is better understanding in emotional therapies. One of the things that I sort of tripped over accidentally because I didn't know my neurodivergent identity when I first started going to therapy. My main physician at the time had just met me. Within 5 minutes had given me a PTSD diagnosis, which made lots of sense. I've had a very hard life. So I accepted it, PTSD, and I went and I researched and I did the deep dive autism thing. It's 9,000 books I bought and just in it. And where I could see myself there, that sort of made sense, but I still wasn't feeling like I was finding myself. And when I would go to trauma therapists, they would make me worse. They would ask me to talk about things in ways that weren't good for me. And I believe it was because they didn't understand, and I didn't understand my neurodivergence and the way my brain works. And so one of the things I'm advocating for right now is that the therapy model change from problem first to person first, where you figure out what is the neurotype, what is the learning modality, what are the things that make up this person's thinking and processing first, and then decide how to proceed with a therapy. Because somebody like me who's very visual, very connected to my experiences, you ask me to talk about a thing, and if I'm not careful, I will be actively reliving it in a PTSD kind of way. And in a standard talk therapy model I've lost my words. When you have PTSD, trauma, in a standard talk therapy model for trauma, for somebody like me, I'm synthesizing. I pull in all information from all sides to go into a space, right? So I don't just remember the one thing you're asking me to talk about, but my brain is actively finding all of the connecteds, right? So 45 minutes of a therapy session, and I need 2 hours in the car before I can even drive home because we haven't understood how to help me. The trauma is a thing we need help with. PTSD was not inaccurate, but not knowing the neurodivergence and the way my brain works put me at risk in a standard therapy model. You're talking about very similar things where if we're not recognizing the 14-year-old, we're not putting in place the advocacy and the support and the knowledge that's going to potentially save them from depression episodes later in their teen years.
Yes.
So I please send me links. Like I will do everything in my power to get this out to the world, because the amount we don't understand about children, let alone adults, but children as neurodivergent humans is devastating to their experience. It's hard enough to grow up.
Yes, no.
But the way we're misunderstanding, mismanaging, and existing in ignorance is so damaging. What do you hope people will do with the information your research is presenting?
I hope, and I shall borrow this phrase from a patient, I hope people will realize that the brain exists in a body, and that the body is connected to a brain, and that the brain is not in a glass jar sitting next to the body, and that the brain needs, there's this interplay and integration between them. And so think body, think brain. Don't say it's all one or the other. They're intimately connected, and look out for bodily things when thinking about the brain, and think about bodily things when thinking about the brain, and the vice versa, and think about brain things when thinking about the body. That's what I would like to do, is sort of tear down, obviously I'm not going to be able to do this alone, tear down this dualism that we have that pervades almost everything. And that's why I find sometimes even, very neurodivergent friendly cartoons of the brain are slightly missing a trick, because that is just a brain in isolation. And there is a body connected to it.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm sure that whoever sees this video is going to join me in that. If we understand the brain better, okay, I'm having two different questions. One is, I'm thinking about some of the research you mentioned where you were able to hook people up and you were able to see, what was going on with their brain. And the people in my world, the neurodivergent people in my world, want access to that. Like, could you please hook me up? Because I'm pretty sure if you could hook me up and you could see what's happening, you could help me, right? Where CT and the other scan.
PET? MRI?
Yeah, the MRI, thank you. Right, those seem to be the only things we do in terms of brain imaging. And when we can't see what's going on, I had a neurologist tell me, you have a beautiful brain. Thank you. I still feel proud of that. But all you did was look at the outside. You don't know how it's functioning. You don't know what's happening when I'm under stress. You don't know what's happening, but that's really expensive. And no one's going to let you just do it, right?
No.
Do you feel like greater accessibility to mapping and things like that would be helpful?
I think it can be. We have in our department at the moment, we have a PhD student who's doing a really exciting piece of research about real-time fMRI, which is tracking brain activity, seeing it as it's happening, and then seeing if you can alter it, which I think will be, and there's a couple of other related projects in different spaces. But I think that will be interesting on an individual level. It'd be fascinating to take part in such an experiment and see what happens. And it will definitely promote awareness, particularly, I hope, of the plasticity of the brain, because people think, oh, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or we were taught at medical school that the brain sort of wasn't very plastic, but of course it is. So I think that's important. But I think we can become a little bit brain centric. I know that because all of our experiences basically are to do with the brain body interaction, what happens in our body processed by the brain and then fed back. But I think just what we were talking about a little while, maybe 5-10 minutes ago, is really the crucial thing. Is not on an individual level for a few people to see their brain flashing and glowing, is for wider society to understand these connections in a much broader sense. And maybe it will take a newspaper article or something about the snazzy scanners and the pictures that they produce to help promote awareness. But overall, the goal has to be awareness across the board.
Okay, I hear you. I'm one of those people that would enjoy having a constant ticker tape experience of my brain, right? Because you just hook me up and I could just always know. I could just be like, oh, that's what my brain is doing right now, right? I'm built very info heavy.
Of course.
Right? I feel more stable the more information I have. The less information I have, the less stable I feel.
Yeah.
So I hear you. Okay, let's make sure we include everything and not get overly focused in one space. As you are doing this research and people are finding out about it, are there things that the sort of average person, those of us who normally are not allowed in your space, right? We don't have the academic degree, we don't have the funding, whatever. Are there things that people like us can do to help?
Of course. So many things. I think working, and Lisa may have spoken to you about the whole concept of trying to get away from these ivory towers where academics sit and think, oh, this is an interesting question, let's go and test this out, and instead really involve the community from the very beginning. What are the priorities? What do you want to know? Why is this important? And really trying to build an ethos of participatory research and answering questions that are not just important for academics, but important for everyone. Because there's no point in doing, well, there's a philosophical debate, isn't there? Knowledge for knowledge's sake is important, but it can be dangerous at the same time. So it's really important to make sure that we're trying to be as participatory as possible. And I'm always delighted to hear from people about, ideas, how we could do things better, what we should think about in the future. I really value those comtributions. And I think what I have learned the most in the past couple of years coming from a medical model, is the importance of making sure we try and use language that is not ableist, if at all possible, and trying to bring that into our research cultures, full stop. And that has made a huge difference to how I view working in this space.
Thank you for that. A main focus of INIS is to bring all of us together on as level a playing field as possible. Language that almost all of us can understand, and presentation that feels welcoming and not exclusive. So I'm really grateful for that perspective. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there something that you see sort of in your future that you really hope all of this work is, you've mentioned, you really want people to understand the brain-body connection and things like that. Is there like, okay, we've understood the brain-body connection, now what?
To understand the strengths of difference, I think, is what I would really like to focus on in the future. Understanding the connections between these differences is obviously important, but I think understanding why, for example, neurodivergent people or hypermobile people make the world a better and interesting place is really, really important, as well as documenting the struggles and the reasons for the struggles. Thank you.
You start talking, I got a huge smile on my face. Yeah, again, for me, the problem first approach misses the human being and pathologizes and I don't need a whole list, right? It just isn't a great approach for anybody, not the neurodivergent community, not anybody else. It's not, in my personal opinion, it's not an approach that will significantly improve quality of care, quality of life. And you've touched on so many things that are birth forward, right? If we understand these things, every piece of life, every point at which you are gets better with the types of things you're talking about. And not just because you're talking about hypermobility and its interconnectedness, but because that model of interconnectedness has more profound possibility if we start accepting it. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Eccles. Your time has been invaluable. any links you can think of that you would like me to share, to publications, to anything. You're on Twitter. I don't know if you're anywhere else, but all of those things, will link them under your video. As long as we can manage the comments, we will try to have comments available for your video. But otherwise, people can reach out through my website, my contact page, and I'll make sure that you know there are questions out there. But thank you for what you are doing. Thank you that you have devoted your professional time and your mental space to all of this. The work you're doing, to me, is just exceptionally important, and you have been really gracious and articulate in presenting it to all of us. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's always a pleasure.